Hey guys, what is going on? It is me, BikuriBox12 here, and welcome back to another Realm of the Mad God ranking video. Last time I took a look at my favorite untiered abilities, and now today I'm going to be following it up with my favorite untiered weapons. Like last time, there will be no vanities, no reskins, and no limited time items. Strictly the main UTs in the game. And like always, in no way am I trying to rank these from worst to best. These are simply my favorites. Starting off at number 30, we've got the Poison Fang Dagger. And like a lot of non-white bag UTs, this is the kind of item that can serve a purpose for newer players early game, but after a certain point in the tiered daggers, it does become obsolete. I do like the poison drip effect on it though, that is a nice touch. Number 29, Sprite Wand. I was unaware that this item had been changed from when all of the wands received a rework, as it now has one of the widest damage gaps in the game, starting at a low 10 and all the way at a high 220. So in theory, you could hit as hard as a sword, while still maintaining the range of a wand, but there is a far greater likelihood that you will deal much less than that. Plus, it comes with its own wavy shot pattern that makes it more difficult to hit. So it's not a very optimal weapon to choose in any scenario, really. Number 28. Staff of the Crystal Serpent. C-Staff, as it was often abbreviated, is a pretty decent pick for early game players who don't have anything above a tier 8. And while its damage may be inferior to the likes of the tier 12 Staff of the Cosmic Hole, the C-Staff does still have somewhat of an edge with a higher rate of fire and slightly increased range. And I've always really liked the vibrant purple aura coming from it. You can tell this is something that Mixcoatl himself would wield. And I've always kind of had this nostalgic bias towards the Forbidden Jungle. Number 27. Bone Dagger. In exchange for less damage and lower range, this is one of the 2 daggers in the game that can actually pierce through enemies, making it a great swap out item that you'll see on a lot of rogues, assassins, and tricksters to get through hordes of enemies or if a boss has some artifacts around it. Believe it or not, despite having run countless manners, I've actually only ever had 2 of these, so I myself haven't used it very often. I get that it's a situational item, but I typically prefer using the tiered daggers. Number 26. Staff of Esben. Once again, in exchange for less damage, reduced range, and a slower rate of fire, the Staff of Esben can pierce through enemies, and its wavy shot pattern is often used to get around certain walls, most commonly in the Shatters or the Abyss of Demons, where there are a lot of openings to each room. Like with the Bone Dagger, I can only see this being useful in a couple of areas. I probably wouldn't use this as my main staff, but I can see how being able to pierce with your weapon on something like a wizard or a necro would be a pretty cool feeling. Number 25. Spirit Staff. A newcomer item from the recent Magic Woods dungeon. This item boasts a considerably higher attack speed, even beating out Staff of the Cosmic Hole up until 6 defense before slowly declining, meaning it's actually quite effective at clearing a bunch of minions in a short amount of time. But past that, I can't see its true potential. I'd have to try it out for myself. Number 24. Crystal Sword. Here we have a simple item with a simple objective. Less damage, more range. The reason melees have such high damage is because they have to get close to their enemies. But if one feels too afraid to go in on an enemy even when playing a melee, the Crystal Sword is the alternative weapon to choose, as it has 4.5 range, 1 tile more than the regular swords, in exchange for, again, less damage. But if you can't even land a hit on the enemy anyway because it's too far away, less damage is better than no damage. Unfortunately, in the last couple of years, with pets becoming more prominent, I have noticed the need for range on melees to become less and less valuable. But I will always remember one of the first times I saw this weapon in action, and truly found it useful. It was in this older Realm YouTube video from 2012, by someone named Yuzuru. He recorded a very basic video with him in the Godlands doing events on his paladin using only a sea sword, and I had this really nice piano music in the background playing. And I had remembered it recently when I was making this list, and when I rewatched it, it took me right back to when I first saw it. And so in that regard, the Crystal Sword is special to me. But the fact of the matter is, I don't use it as much as I used to. Number 23. Staff of Extreme Prejudice. My very first white bag that I ever got. To me, this has always been one of the craziest items with one of the coolest names that unfortunately is far too situational for its own good. It has 10 total shots that culminate into the highest DPS of any staff, all exploding outward from a single point like a spell bomb, under the one condition that you are the spell bomb. When you point that staff out directly in front of you, that's where all your damage is, requiring you to basically sit on everything that you fight if you want all of your shots to land, because if you don't, the item becomes pointless. Now, I'm not going to ask them to buff EP or anything. It's a classic item, you should leave that stuff alone. But it can definitely feel more like a vanity item at times, as it's very fun to mess around with and I like having them in my possession, but its situational purposes I find are unjustified. Number 22. Sullen Blade. It wasn't until a few months ago that I remembered this item existed. The layer of Draconis for me has just been one big blur from when it was accidentally released to now. When the dungeon had first come out by mistake, everybody had the new armors and every ninja was rocking this new katana, which was originally called the Celestial Blade, but now it's since had another overhaul, removing its ability to pierce as well as some of its range, in exchange for 3 shots that, when combined, are actually way more powerful than any of the tiered katanas, acting similar to the Staff of Extreme Prejudice, although it is more like a demon blade or pixie sword. Unfortunately, this does kind of play into the ninja's one major weakness: it's not very tanky, so needing to sit directly on top of your enemies to get the most damage isn't a very common opportunity. Number 21. Saint Abraham's Wand. A very holy and pure item that ironically doesn't even drop in a white bag. It's another case of the sea sword where damage is sacrificed so range can be increased. So much so that you can even hit certain bosses without activating them. The 4 vitality and wisdom is especially nice for Wizmod, and I've always really liked the sprite design. It's a nice contrast from the other wands. Number 20. Ancient Stone Sword. Here's an item that I've always wanted to love, but simply never found enough of a reason to. This is a really cool sword, don't get me wrong. There's something very cathartic about swinging a big heavy blade. Plus it's got a little bit more range than regular tiered swords. Not as much as Crystal Sword, but it's a nice alternative. The main problem is that its DPS is consistently lower than Acclaim, assuming you don't get weakened, in which case it is better at around 30-40 defense. But in most scenarios, I can't find much of a reason to use Stone Sword, other than I want to use it. I know that on Warriors you can often one-shot a lot of enemies, but Acclaim and the Stone Sword have always been so neck and neck for me, with Acclaim beating it out at most times. It's still a really good sword and a classic one at that, but it's more of a trophy to me than something I use all the time. Number 19. Conducting Wand. While it may have a relatively low base damage, its high rate of fire in combination with +4 dex, as well as 4 wisdom, which is good on Sorcerer, Conducting Wand produces consistently higher damage outputs than the tops, making it a more powerful pick in nearly every situation. The only drawback to it is that it doesn't pierce, but I honestly think that that is a small price to pay, and is a reasonable trade-off for an otherwise great item. Number 18. Doku no Ken. I imagine a handful of you may have expected this to be a bit higher given my track record, or rather, lack thereof. Doku no Ken for the longest time was considered the best katana in the game, with no question. After a relatively recent update though, it has since become a good contender for the number 1 pick. While it does beat out the tier 12 Masamune until about 43 defense, Sadamune, the tier 13, beats it out entirely. Plus the Doku does have this wavy shot pattern that can make it somewhat difficult to aim. The other perk to it though is that it does have slightly more range, which is another one of the ninja's drawbacks. So it definitely can still be the best katana, but it's really up to the user. Number 17. Spirit Dagger. One of the first weapons to introduce the idea of having a wacky damage range. A really low minimum, but a really high maximum. Not as much as the current Sprite Wand, mind you, but it's wider than normal, which means there is a chance that you could be dealing less or more damage than a foul. But on average, the damage is actually consistently higher, making this almost a clear-cut winner, aside from the funky shot pattern, and slightly less range. Number 16. Coral Bow. The excitement of getting an Ocean Trench white bag back in the day was truly like no other. Before we had this oversaturation of UT bows, there was Doombow and Coral Bow, the golden duo. Ocean Trench has always been one of my favorite dungeons to look at, and the radiant pink color from the coral set I find has always complemented that aesthetic. The Coral Bow is just a very pretty looking item. It also has higher range and a little bit better damage on each shot than Covert, and the increased rate of fire allowed me to be a little bit less accurate, which was a nice contrast from the very slow Doombow shot. Number 15. Wand of the Bulwark. Truly one of the wackiest items in the game, with the highest single shot damage of any wand, and rather than shooting your projectiles at the enemies, you throw them out and they begin moving at a consistent speed in a figure 8 motion, allowing you to fill up an area with these like moving landmines, meaning its full power can only be realized if the enemies walk into your line of fire. And so in that regard, no, this item isn't exactly multi-purpose. However, to this day, I still believe that this is one of the rarest white bags in the game. Considering the Snake Pit is probably the second most commonly run dungeon for me aside from Sprite World, the fact that I've only ever had 2 in my whole lifetime is a testament to its rarity. It may not be the most useful thing, but man is it cool. Number 14. Void Blade. Actually not too far off from Bulwark, this katana does a very similar thing. You actually do plant landmines on the ground for your enemies to walk into, with even more damage. When put into the right hands, you can stack tons of damage. When this item first came out, people were stacking shots like nothing else. It's been nerfed since, but it still retains a lot of its power. Unfortunately, I haven't really learned how to use its power yet. I'm not very good at it. If you can't predict where your enemies are going to move, then you essentially have to sit on them if you want to hit them directly. So until I learn how to use it properly, it's staying here. Number 3. Pirate King's Cutlass. A sword that was once completely unusable is now one of the best in the game. All 3 epic dungeons had their white bag UT reworked, and this is no exception. You lose a couple of defense and a few points of range, but you're gaining 3 speed and a rate of fire that allows you to outdamage even the tier 13 Sword of Splendor until a very high amount of defense. And since I'm already playing on a melee, I don't find the slight reduction in range to really be much of a hindrance. The curvature of the sprite is also very accurate to what it's trying to be, and I find it to be a nice change in look from most swords. Number 12. Crystal Wand. Originally the only wand that could pierce through enemies, it has since been changed to be the only wand that can armor pierce, meaning you can outdamage the tiered wands on higher defense enemies, especially late game. Like Conducting Wand, you are sacrificing the ability to pierce, but I think having the ability to flatline your DPS more than makes up for it. Number 11. Void Bow. I'll admit I wasn't super enthusiastic about this item the first time I saw it in action and read about it, mainly because the archer has already had so many UTs in the past, it just kind of felt like one more in the pile. But I do realize that it has some of the highest damage of any bow, even beating out Doom Bow for a considerable amount of defense, while still retaining the same attack speed of regular bows, as well as the single shot of Doom Bow. The drawbacks are that it has reduced range, and another wavy pattern about it to make it harder to hit. But on pure damage alone, this could be seen by many as the new main bow, if, you can get your hands on it. Number 10. Queen's Stinger Dagger. A direct upgrade from the Bone Dagger, this item not only pierces through enemies with more range, it also pierces through armor, giving it higher DPS on enemies where other daggers wouldn't. The main reason I want it, though, is because I know I will never have it, and sometimes the most elusive things are the most desirable. Maybe one day I'll complete a nest. Maybe. Number 9. 1000 Shot. Here's a bow that I underestimated for quite some time. I had 3 of these sitting in my vault and said, you know what, let's give them a shot finally. To my surprise, it's actually become my new go-to bow for clearing Godlands. While it has lower damage, the 200% rate of fire is such a pleasant spectacle on the eyes, and it allows me to be pretty lenient with my accuracy as it's essentially one continuous line of bullets. Its overall damage is still inferior to a lot of the other UT bows even at low defense, but I found it to be a lot more fun than I had expected. Number 8. Sword of the Colossus. Truly a legendary blade to wield. This powerhouse of a weapon wins on strength alone, with some of the highest DPS for a sword without needing to sit at point blank, all in exchange for, you guessed it, a wavy shot pattern. It seems to be the easiest way to make a weapon hard to use. I can definitely see this being a very effective weapon when put into the right hands. Number 7. Doom Bow. One of the oldest and most revered UTs in the game that is still used to this day. The Doom Bow has always been known as a staple weapon for the archer and huntress. Very slow, well-timed shots that deal massive damage upon contact. With maxed attack and some bonuses, you can often deal over 1000 damage per shot. It's truly an amazing feeling. And while there are a couple of other bows that can beat it out at points, it will always be that devilish bow that you can count on. Practically fashioned from the bones of its enemies and dripping in darkness itself. It's something that I think will always have a place in our inventory. Number 6. Demon Blade. Well, sure, Pixie is better in most ways, and you could argue Colossus as well. Demon Blade is a lot like the Doom Bow in that it's been a reliable item ever since it came out. It was another staple that every melee class needed to have. It had 2 shots that, while weaker individually, could be combined to be even more powerful than the Wine Cellar top. Especially now, with melee sitting on enemies more than ever, it's ironically an even more effective item. And prying the blade away from the Demon King himself for your own good is a very empowering state of affairs. Number 5. Leaf Bow. I used to make fun of this item because I didn't think it was good, and then I actually read it, and it turns out it's the most powerful bow in the game. You shoot leaves in a single shot, wavy pattern, higher rate of fire, but if all your shots manage to land, it's way more powerful than the Doom Bow and even the Void Bow. It may look like an ordinary bow based on the sprite, but its power truly is unrivaled. The only drawback to it is that it can't pierce through enemies, but if you can work around that shortcoming, then this can easily become your new main weapon. Number 4. Staff of Unholy Sacrifice. I've talked about this item in the past with my Lost Halls item ranking video, so I'll try to keep this short, but this has to be the most bizarre concept of a weapon, while still having it be effective. Bulwark and EP are cool, but man, they are not practical. This item still seems like it can retain its practicality. Absurdly high DPS, it pierces through targets 4 shots. It fires backwards, forcing you to aim in the opposite direction that you want it to go. This truly is an experimental weapon, and getting my hands on it one day will be an experience. Number 3. Wand of the Fallen. While not as high damage dealing as the Bulwark, it is however far more usable, while still boasting some of the highest DPS of any wand. It compensates for this with shorter range and a lack of piercing, but if raw damage is your only concern, then this can be a very fun and powerful item to mess with. And it has such a cool sprite design for a weapon. You're essentially hitting everyone in the head with a cherry blossom branch, but never has that looked this good. Number 2. Ray Katana. I actually just got this item earlier today and was very shocked when it happened. First rock dragon in ages, finally got one, wasn't expecting it, super happy. It's commonly agreed upon that the biggest weaknesses of the ninja lie in its glass cannon exploitation. It can deal a lot of damage, but it can't take much on its own. Low defense, low range, forcing you to get close and take those hits. Ray Katana undoes most of that problem, putting you at a very comfortable range at 6.2 and a lower but oddly consistent 111 damage. There's no range here, it's just 111 every time. While it may be a weaker choice, it's definitely going to make my ninja a lot more versatile. Number 1, by process of elimination, has to be the Dirk of Cronus. Never have I ever felt more sympathy towards an item before, because the Cronus has always been this mystical, respected item that very rarely drops from the Cube God, and as a reward for being so lucky and fortunate, has the highest damage of any dagger without removing any of its attack speed. Plus 4 wisdom, cause why not, and an insanely cool sprite at a slightly lower range. The sad thing is, the Aetheryte dagger exists, which not only has higher damage, but is also an item that can be traded for, whereas Cronus is a soulbound UT. Even though Aetheryte does have a very low range, making it not very viable for Trickster or Assassin, the fact that it's so readily available and is better in respects is pretty unfair to the Cronus, because Cronus should be the best dagger in the game. It's certainly the hardest one to get, and with an awesome design like this, it needs to be the best. But even so, I have always loved it. It reminds me of a simpler time, when Cube Gods were an actual threat, when Cronus was tradable, when going in deep was a commendable endeavor, when Realm wasn't as bloated as it is now. And for that, Dirk of Cronus is my favorite UT weapon. So those are my favorite untiered weapons, all placed from least to greatest. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know what your favorite UTs are down below. And as always, don't forget to check out the next episode whenever I post it, which will probably be soon. Alright. See ya.